It is wonderful to be with you today for this very special event. Several of my UB colleagues will be joining us later in the event. For our SUNY honorary degree conferral ceremony, I'm pleased to be joined by Ms. Eunice Lewin, member of the State University of New York Board of Trustees. On behalf of our entire UB community, I'm delighted to offer a warm welcome to today's distinguished guests, our SUNY honorary degree recipients, Dr. Donnica Moore and Dr. Richard Schatz. Dr. Moore and Dr. Schatz, this recognition has been a long time coming. While we regret that we could not honor you at last spring's commencement exercises, we appreciate your forbearance and flexibility throughout these exceptional times. Regardless of when and how we confer SUNY honorary degrees, it is always a privilege to recognize individuals who embody UB's mission of excellence. Through their life's work, both of today's SUNY honorary degree recipients are richly deserving of this honor. We award these degrees to distinguished individuals whose accomplishments and contributions are of a special significance to UB and Western New York. These honorary degrees, proposed by our campus and authorized by the SUNY trustees, are conferred on individuals who represent the highest ideals of the university at Buffalo. To begin today's conferral ceremony, I'm pleased to recognize Dr. Donnica Moore, an internationally recognized expert in women's health. Dr. Moore has demonstrated a sustained commitment to medical education and to the well-being of women around the world. A pioneering physician, Dr. Moore is president of Sapphire Women's Health Group. Through multiple media platforms, she shares evidence-based medical information in lay terms with women around the world. A 1986 alumna of the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, Dr. Moore has served both the community as physician and her profession in numerous capacities. This includes her work as the editor-in-chief of Women's Health for Life and numerous other leadership roles for journals and organizations focused on women's health. As a trusted resource for women around the globe, Dr. Moore has championed accessibility to sound medical information throughout her career. At the same time, she is devoted to sharing her expertise in areas such as drug discovery and cervical cancer screening. Moreover, she has underscored the benefits of a healthy lifestyle with her audience, thereby enhancing the lives of women around the globe. Dr. Moore embodies the highest ideals of personal and professional excellence that we seek to instill in our students. Thus, she has brought deep pride and great prominence to UB and to our SUNY system. In recognition of her notable and distinguished career achievements, and in appreciation for our association with and impact on our university, the University at Buffalo is privileged to confer upon Dr. Moore, on behalf of the State University of New York, an honorary doctorate of science. I invite Trustee Levin to confirm the State University of New York honorary doctorate.
Thank you, President Tripathi. By the authority of the trustees and the Chancellor of the State University of New York and the Council and Faculty of the University of Buffalo, I will now confer upon Dr. Donnica Moore the degree of Doctor of Science, honoris causa, with all of the rights and privileges thereto pretending. In token thereof, she has been presented a diploma and hood appropriate to that degree. My sincere congratulations, Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Trustee Lowen. President Tripathi, Dean Cain, all the dignitaries, family, and friends watching. This is such an honor. It has been 35 years since my medical school graduation, and I am humbled by the opportunity to do it again via a technology which had not even been imagined at the time, in front of my two favorite people who had not yet been conceived. Now, in many ways, this degree means even more to me than the first. That degree only took 4 years to earn, and I knew exactly what I had to do to get it. This one took my entire career with many winding turns and serendipitous decision crossroads along the way. My biggest thanks for this honor, though, go to all of my professors at the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. I wish I had a list of all their names and the time to acknowledge each one, but here's some of the standouts. I clearly remember the very first day of biochemistry with the charismatic Professor Dr. Murray Ettinger, who warned us that 90% of what we learned in medical school would no longer be true in 25 years. Unfortunately, he said, we don't know which 10% will be true. And I couldn't help myself but reply, anatomy? Which got the laughs I intended, but since it was biochemistry, I should have said the Krebs cycle. But Dr. Ettinger was also the professor who chided me after our first exam when I got a B, saying I would rather have a doctor who was a C student who got a B than a doctor who should be an A student who got a B. Ouch. I have quoted that often, mostly to my kids, but that has truly influenced everything I have tried to do in the field of medicine since then. Dr. Alistair Brownie was also a great influence, especially years later when he mentored me through a leadership role in the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists. I was that student, always at the ready when the professor asked at the end, are there any questions? And usually it was along the lines of, how is this affected by estrogen? Or various permutations of, well, how does this affect women versus the 70-kilogram male? Now, those questions may seem obvious now, but in those days, that was kind of a breakthrough and probably a little annoying to my professors who didn't really have a lot of answers. Little did I know at the time, though, I would make a career based on asking and trying to answer those questions. I have so many thanks for the very few women professors who we had at the time. We leaned on them way too heavily for mentorship. Dr. Joan Saluski was my only woman OBGYN at the time. Psych professor, Dr. Gloria Roblin, I now know, thanks to Google, was the first professor, non-MD professor at UB, male or female. And she taught one of the very few sex classes in any medical school at the time. And I still quote her frequently, including her saying, you're here and you're safe. The late Dr. Linda Brodsky was the mentor for the first student chapter of the American Medical Women's Association, which I started at UB. And little did I know at that time what a huge role AMWA would play in my leadership and career development, going on to serve as a national officer in several positions, being a member of the board of directors for many years, and now returning as a board member after a 25-year hiatus. But it was our male dean, the beloved Dr. John Naughton, who was the one who made it possible for me to do that by giving me a travel grant and 5 days off to attend an AMWA leadership meeting in San Juan, Puerto Rico in the winter of 1985, which would turn out to be a tremendous influence on my career and my life. And just in conclusion, I was also very proud to have been a student at UB with its long history of legends in the field of medicine, as well as in OBGYN, which became my chosen specialty. Dr. Robert Patterson was not only a patient, kind teacher and a mentor, but he was my personal physician. And I walked the same halls as Dr. Jack Lippes, who was the inventor of the Lippes Loop IUD. And 30 years later, I spearheaded an IUD education project to educate 15,000 physicians on IUD insertion and training and counseling. I did not know at the time, because we didn't have Google, that Dr. Herbert Hauptman won a Nobel Prize the same year we were complaining about biophysics lectures. And of course, I've always been very proud to have been a student of Dr. Klaus Lundgren, who was the inventor of the first successful smoking cessation product, Nicorette gum. And I'm humbled to walk in the shadows of these giants.
Wow.
Thank you, Dr. Moore, and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Now, it is our pleasure to recognize Dr. Richard Schatz, an elected fellow of the American College of Cardiology. Dr. Schatz is the research director of cardiovascular interventions at the Scripps Clinic and director of gene and stem cell therapy. A world-renowned expert in interventional cardiology, Dr. Schatz has profoundly contributed to society through his innovations and inventions. The coronary stent that Dr. Schatz co-created, the first approved for restenosis, has formed the cornerstone of interventions therapy for coronary artery disease. Known as the Palmas-Schatz stent, this life-saving device has been used to treat coronary artery disease in nearly 100 million patients worldwide since its approval in the 1990s. Enrolled as a student at UB in the late 1970s, Dr. Schatz has maintained a strong affinity for UB, crediting our faculty and curriculum for inspiring his career in medicine. Held in the highest regard for his expertise and achievements, Dr. Schatz has been recognized with numerous honors and awards. These include the Fritz Zeh and Dolores H. Russ Prize, which recognizes biomedical engineering achievements that have significantly improved the human condition. Dr. Schatz's accomplishments exemplify the core of UB's academic mission and are a source of great inspiration for our university community. His understanding of one of the most critical areas of medicine and the ingenuity of his research have bettered humanities on a global scale. In recognition of his contributions to medicine and of the profound impact his work has had on our world, and in appreciation of the inspiring example he has set for all of us, the University at Buffalo is privileged to confer upon Dr. Schatz, on behalf of the State University of New York, an honorary doctorate in science. At this point, I invite Trustee Levin to confer the State University of New York honorary degree.
Thank you, President Tripathi. By the authority of the trustees and the Chancellor of the State University of New York and the Council and the faculty of the University at Buffalo, I now confer upon Dr. Richard Schatz the degree of Doctor of Science, honoris causa, with all the rights and privileges thereto pertaining. In token thereof, he has been presented a diploma and hood appropriate to that degree. My sincere congratulations, Dr. Schatz.
Well, thank you very much. I cannot even begin to tell you what an honor this is. Represents unfinished business for me for the last 50 years. And I've thought about this ever since I left Buffalo in 1973.
Wow.
And my memories are really interesting. I'd like to, of course, thank Dr. Tripathi first and the trustees, Trustee Lewin and Dean Cain. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. But my experience in Buffalo was really life-changing for me. And I was a young student in Long Island, and when I was searching out colleges, I knew I wanted to go into medicine pretty early in life. And when I asked around my colleagues and my counselors and upperclassmen out on Long Island where I was in school, I said, where is the best pre-med program? And it was unanimous. It was University of Buffalo. There was no second or third. It was just the first place you had to go. So I was thrilled when I got in and excited to see the campus when I got there. in 1970. And I was absolutely blown away by the quality of the teaching, the quality of the people, the commitment from the university. I never felt like I was floundering. I never felt like I couldn't turn to somebody for help. And as promised, the science program was absolutely extraordinary. And Dr. Moore's a little younger than me, so she remembers all the names of her professors. I only remember O.T. Beachley, who was our inorganic our chemistry teacher, who was absolutely phenomenal. And I was always the obnoxious kid in the front row, raising my hand, asking for more homework. So my colleagues didn't really like me, but it was a very big class, and there were 1,000 students.
Wow.
1,000 freshman students in our inorganic chemistry class. It was so big that they had to have 2 classes back to back in a 500-seat auditorium. And I was blown away when I walked in there by the number of students, and also the quality of the students was quite good. There were so many pre-med students. But I realized that I really had to work hard to compete. And without the support of the TAs and the professors and the curriculum, I don't think I could have done what I did. And I credit all of my success really to that, because that experience and my learning there really got me into Duke, which is, I applied as a sophomore. So that means I took my MCATs as a sophomore, and I'd only taken half the classes that you need to take your MCATs for. So I had a very enriched high school program with lots of science. My dad was an engineer, real scientifically oriented. So, but the curriculum at Buffalo was the icing on the cake. And I have to say that what I learned there translated immediately into my success at Duke. And I was very young, so I had a maturity problem. I had to really step it up when I got there, because I was only 20 years old and all my classmates were 26, and higher, and married. But I just remember very fondly all of my experiences at Buffalo, because it was very well-rounded. And by that, I mean, there was so much to do, and there was so much support. Your personal life, your social life, as you know, can be kind of harrowing, but for us, it was just nothing but fun. And we ended up on the top floor of Tower Hall. We called ourselves the Penthouse Gang, all freshmen from all parts of New York. And we just had a ball. And people always talk about how hard college was and what a difficult time it was, especially the pre-med track. And you know what? All I remember is how much fun I had there. And it's only because we had support. And even the humanities, I took some great humanities courses, and setting aside the snow and the rest of that, by the time the spring came, you were so excited that you kind of forgot about the snow. But it was a wonderful experience, and felt so lucky that I went there, and couldn't be more proud to graduate finally. And my kids always tease me. They look on my wall, which is filled with diplomas, and they said, "Gee, Dad, you're the only college dropout here. I think you ought to step it up and try and go back to college." And I actually was thinking of going back to San Diego State here and taking a few courses so I could graduate. Then I had this great idea. Well, why don't I just write to the trustees and see if they would be kind enough to give me an honorary degree? So that is how I came to pass, and that's how I ended up where I am. And I can thank all of you, and I can thank the University of Buffalo for all of that.
Thank you, Dr. Schatz, and congratulations again. And now we are ready to begin our discussion with Dr. Moore and Dr. Schatz. I'm pleased to be joined by my colleagues, Dr. Michael Cain, VP Student for Health Sciences and Dean of the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, Mr. Rod Grabowski, Vice President for University Advancement, and Dr. Ann Curtis, Charles and Mary Bauer Professor and Chair, and SUNY Distinguished Professor in the Department of Medicine. Michael, I believe you are starting us out with a question for Dr. Schatz.
I am, and let me just again add my congratulations to both of you. And Donnica, I had the unusual, when you mentioned John Naughton, I went to George Washington University Medical School, and John was my dean. And he was recruited to Buffalo right at the end of my 4th year of medical school. And left GW with a very good relationship. So we, as our GW students, made it clear that we wanted John to come back and graduate us because he had been our dean for 3.5 years. And so that happened. So then when I came to UB as dean in 2006, John was chair of the Department of Rehab Medicine. So I had the usual opportunity that he was my dean, and for the rest of the end of his career and time, I got to be his dean. And so it was fun to reacquaint myself with John, and he was a great man. So I admire him as well. So Dr. Schatz, just as a cardiologist, and Dr. Curtis and I are both cardiologists, although we evolved into electricians, but the coronary arteries are important. So as President Tripathi mentioned, you're known well for the stent, and we were just wondering if you would talk a little bit about what that time period was like and the invention that you are responsible for.
Sure. Well, it's quite a story, and it's one of those sort of Horatio Alger type stories. It's something that never should have happened, and it was pure serendipity. I talk about the importance of sliding doors when I talk to our students and our fellows about the importance of being open-minded and always working really hard, because doors open all the time. You got to be prepared to go through those doors. And it was very fortuitous. I met Dr. Palmaz around 1985 or so, and he was working very quietly in a lab in San Antonio, Texas, where I was. And the short version of the story is that we were just thrown together by a mutual friend. And it was, again, serendipity. He was working on this project very quietly. He had absolutely no intent for human use. He was more of a scientist, and he just wanted to do research. And I got my research beginnings in Buffalo. We talked about opportunity, and I was able to spend some time at Roswell Park. And that was a great opportunity for me to see that side of the world. And it instilled in me that sort of the inspiration to ask questions and solve problems. So when I met Dr. Palmaz, I was a cardiologist. I was doing angioplasty, which started around 1978, 79, came to America in 1980, but it was failing quite easily. It wasn't really as good as we thought it was. And when I met Dr. Palmaz, he had a solution, but he was only working in the large vessels, and he had no intention of going in the coronaries because it was thought too radical. And so we just shook hands that day, and then my life changed forever based on that chance meeting, and set into motion a whole series of events that changed the world. And we never thought it would ever end up where it was, because everyone thought we were crazy. We couldn't get anybody to support our research because they thought it was heretical to actually put metal in the coronaries. The blood tissue interface was utterly impossible, and the coronaries were thought to be fraught with hazard. But I didn't believe any of them. So I looked at Julio's device. I said, this is not going to work. We have to figure out a way to make this work in the coronary. So I spent quite a long time trying to figure that out, and through a whole bunch of twists and turns and a whole bunch of strange events, it actually came to pass, and we were able to prove that it worked. Probably the funniest thing was running out of money and going to all of the industry people and looking for money. And they said, absolutely not. This is a crazy idea. It's never going to work. So there were 1,000 ways it would have failed, but there was only one way it could have succeeded. And for some strange reason, all the doors opened appropriately. So we said, okay, nobody wants it, we'll just do it ourselves. So I set upon a business plan to try and actually find some money. And we found a very wealthy hamburger guy who made hamburgers for a living, and he funded our research. He was just so fascinated with it, and the rest is history. So we ended up working for quite a bit of time in the animal models for many, many years, and did our first patients around 1987. And then the rest is history. We got approved in 1994, and then that whole field has just exploded. And it's not just coronaries, because our concept of the balloon expandable stent is now used to replace aortic valves, which is another one of my inventions. We came up with that idea way back in the 1980s. We were so busy working on aneurysms and carotids and renals that I let it drop and let somebody else do it, because I couldn't do it. There was just too much work. And we realized that the body was a series of tubes just waiting to be stented. So from there, we cut a deal with Johnson & Johnson, and then it just took off like crazy. And of course, the devices are much better now. But here it is 30 years later. I still do procedures. I do about 300 or 400 cases a year, and a day doesn't go by where the nurse hands me a stent. I look at it and I go, wow, this is pretty good. This is pretty interesting. They've gotten so much easier and better. And they're ubiquitous now, of course. If you're in a large room with people, you just raise your hand if you have a stent, or if you know somebody who has a stent, then of course everybody's hand goes up. But there are even more applications that this keeps going and going. And it's amazing that it stood the test of time. So I feel very fortunate to have been a part of it and to be one of the early founders, and it certainly exceeded our expectations.
Thank you, Dr. Schatz. It's actually amazing how persistence in studying something that other people think is radical winds up being in the mainstream of how we take care of patients with cardiovascular disease today. So that's so interesting. And my congratulations to Dr. Schatz and to Dr. Moore. And the next question is for Dr. Moore. You've dedicated your career to breaking down barriers to information about women's health. Could you describe your approach and how it has evolved over time?
Well, a lot of it is raising my hand and saying, as I would say to Dr. Schatz about his remarks to the last question, how is this affected by estrogen? And how does this affect women differently or differentially than in men? And certainly with stenting, as in many other things, we've had to look at whether the devices need to be different or made differently, whether they need to be different sizes. I'll let him answer more of the details of the questions about stenting. But I think many times it's just my approach is asking the question and saying, identifying the elephant in the room. I think my approach also has been greatly influenced by an experience I had about 100 years ago when I was the medical director at Sandoz, which is now Novartis, for neuroendocrinology. And we had the first drug in development to treat some of the symptoms of AIDS at the time, which we were still calling HTLV3 when I was at UB. And I went down to make a presentation to the FDA as a brand new medical director. I'd been in the industry for 6 whole weeks. And I did something that I still do to this day when I got to the hotel room. And that was I turned on CNN to see what news had happened in the time that I was traveling. And there was a documentary called The Innocent Victims of AIDS. And it was looking at women and children with AIDS. And this was 1989. And I was just fascinated how everything that I was about to do in the next meeting would be have a much greater impact if I was able to talk about it on television for 30 minutes. And I think that started my wheels turning about the power of medical communications. Although in fairness, I had gotten an award about 20 years ago from an organization that gave me a scholarship to go to college. It was Seroptimist International, which is an international women's business association. And my brother was planning to attend, and he said, is your speech all written? And I said, I'm not going to write a speech. I'm just going to, make some thank you remarks. And he said, don't you have a speech you can pull out of the drawer and just, that you've given to something else that you could just read, at the event? And I got to thinking about speech in the drawer, and I pulled out my high school scrapbook when I had gotten the award. And there in my handwriting was the speech I gave at that national award ceremony. And when I was 15 years old getting that award, because I also went to college when I was pretty young, I had written in my acceptance speech that while my dream was to be a physician and have a major impact on women's health, I also wanted to be a journalist because there was no point making scientific discoveries if we couldn't explain them to people in terms that they could understand and relate to. So I've modified that a little bit since I was 15. And I've also added using humor as the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. So I call my shtick medutainment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moore. Dr. Schatz, you credit your experience at UB with helping you on your career path. You talked about part of the reason why you decided to come to UB and your Roswell experience. Can you tell us a bit more about what you learned at UB that helped you really define your life's work? What was that curiosity? Was there professors that helped inspire you or teach you how to think?
It's a great question. I would have to say what I learned was pursuit of knowledge and discipline. It was very competitive, but the thing that strikes me most about those years was, as I said before, I think the exceptional support that I got. Can you imagine a class with 1,000 students? I keep bringing that back because it's incredible to me. I don't know how a professor or the TAs can ever give students the individual attention that they need. You feel like you're lost. I never felt lost, ever. I never felt lost. No matter, and all the classes are actually quite large with a few exceptions, but I think the most important thing was the discipline of studying, of being able to have access to TAs. And like I said, I was the nerdy kid in the front who was always raising his hand, asking questions. But there was always somebody there. And I'm not sure that's the way all universities are. I'm not sure they're that personal. So even though it was a very large school, I never felt like I was lost there. And even though I was only there for 3 years, I never had a class that was I could consider a bad class. I never, every class was extraordinary. I wish I could remember the names, but our freshman calculus class had 1,000 or probably 500 students in that. Then organic chemistry had an exceptional professor. I wish I could remember his name. In molecular biology, same thing. Very, very large classes, but it also inspired me to become a teacher myself, I think, because I saw how passionate the professors were about their work. And that really did inspire me myself because I've been in academics my entire career. So I've always had young students around. Even at Scripps, we have we have about 150 fellows in the whole institution, but we have about 16 cardiology fellows. And if it weren't for them, I'm not sure I would go to work. It's not that interesting to me. I can do these procedures in my sleep. I can do 8 or 10 procedures in a day and kind of laugh my way through them. But that's not the fun part. And the fun part really is the teaching. So I really do think that seeing the passion and the competence of these professors was so inspiring. And like I said, I never had a bad class. I never had a professor I didn't like. Our physics professor was very quirky, but he made it so much fun that, like I said, it's just like everywhere you turn there, you found somebody who had a passion for what they were doing. And that was really inspiring to me.
Thank you, Dr. Schatz. The next question is for Dr. Moore. And so in recent years, we have seen major advances in women's health research and access to healthcare for women. And for evidence, we need only look to the work like yours, as well as the studies that have been done under the Women's Health Initiative, in which UB plays a leading role. So the question to you is, what do you think has been one of the most impactful changes to the field of women's health in recent years?
So certainly the Women's Health Initiative, for those who don't know, it was the largest clinical trial ever conducted in women. There were some major issues with it, including that the results were announced by press release before they were published in the medical journal. But I think what we have to go back to is this issue of access. So if I were pinned down and said what was the greatest, advance during my career, I would have to say the Affordable Care Act, which allows millions of women and men and children access to healthcare that they wouldn't otherwise have. And I've come full circle on this in my career. I took an amazing class in college. And Dr. Schatz, I feel so sorry for you with 1,000 people in a class. I went to a college where I had 12 people in a class. And one of the classes was run by the Commonwealth Foundation, which is the largest healthcare foundation then, at least. I think now the Gates Foundation might have something to say about that. But we learned read all kinds of books about access to healthcare and who shall live and who shall have access. And healthcare was at a very transformative time, our healthcare delivery system. And I am at the point in my age where maybe I have a little bit more breadth of vision, where I see that if we can't provide vaccines to 100% of people who need them, then what is really the value of what we're doing? Or if somebody has a rare disease and they can't get access to the one or two physicians in the country who are experts in that rare disease, what are we really doing? It certainly was not an accident that I was influenced by Buffalo's proximity to Canada. And we were very arrogant when I was a medical student about how our healthcare system was superior. And we had Rothwell Park and we had Buffalo General. And I remember being on the oncology service, and 30% of our patients at one point were Canadians who had come across the border to get healthcare that they couldn't get in a timely fashion. And lots of our cardiovascular surgery patients were from Canada. But now I really feel like we have a lot still to learn about access.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Dr. Schatz, your work now is focused on the field of stem cell and gene therapy for angiogenesis in heart patients with severe angina. Can you tell us about this research and the outcomes you hope to achieve?
Sure. So a lot of things started changing for me between 1985 and 1998 or so. We were stenting everybody, and we were trying to figure out ways to make the stent more deliverable. We were adding drugs to it. And we sort of, what I would say we hit a wall about the limits of what I could do with it because of conflict of interest. I wasn't really allowed to do any kind of research with other stents. I always wanted to do clinical trials comparing ours to others. And they said, you can't do that because it's yours. And I said, oh, okay, what can I do? Nothing. So I said, okay, I better think of something else to do. But at the same time, we had a lot of patients who, as our clinicians will tell you, that what do you do with somebody who can't take more stents, who can't be bypassed? And it's a fairly sizable number of patients out there. So the other thing that happened at the same time was one of my former fellows, who Dr. Moore might know, is a young lady named Dr. Mimi Guarnieri. She was one of our interventional fellows, and she started our big women's health program. And she got fed up with stents because she said, why are we doing this? Why don't we just try and prevent this? And she took a real leadership role way back. And you probably know some of her work from way back in La Jolla. And that was sort of inspirational to start thinking out of the box for me as well. So what do you do with somebody who has refractory heart failure or refractory angina, and we can't do anything else for them with traditional techniques or methods, medications, stents, bypass surgery? It turns out it's a lot of patients. So we embarked on a program way back in the early 1990s looking at selective genes and plasmids, VEGF, FGF, PDGF, a whole series of plasmids that you could inject into the heart. No one thought we could do that either, but we had to come up with that technology as well. No one thought it was safe. Some wanted to use adenovirus vectors. We didn't want to do that. We thought you could get by with just plasmids. So our first journey was in the refractory angina patients. So we developed a technology where we could take single-strand DNA and that was encoded for VEGF, and we started injecting it into patients who were ischemic. And it was really pretty amazing. We did 3 big clinical trials, and it was surprising how good it worked. Unfortunately, the company went out of business, so it never really came to fruition, which is a pity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schatz. Dr. Moore, you shared a little bit about your favorite professors, but how did you come to choose to attend UB, and how would you characterize your experience during those years?
I'm so glad you asked me this question because I didn't have time to include this story in my remarks, and I really wanted to. There's 2 answers to this question. The first is like Dr. Schatz. I asked around, and, I was looking for the best school in New York because I was a New York resident, and paying for medical school was a big issue for this poor girl from Brooklyn, especially after I went to a very expensive college that had not yet provided loan-free tuition financial assistance to all their students. So I started medical school with a substantial amount of student debt. at the time. At the time, by the way, UB's tuition for in-state residents was $12,500, which was all the money in the world as far as I knew or was concerned. So that was why I had my thoughts set on UB. But I showed up at UB and I was interviewed by the late, great Dr. Nickerson, who was a giant in pathology. And he was very, very serious in the interview. And he asked me a question. He said, if you had unlimited time and unlimited resources, how would you solve all of the healthcare delivery how would you solve all the problems facing our healthcare delivery system today? And, I just told you I had taken all these classes in college on this topic, and I thought I was very well read and very knowledgeable. And I took a deep breath and I exhaled and I said, well, first I would really have to study the matter, and I would use a significant amount of my time to research this. And he then he pushed his chair back and he let out a belly laugh. And he said, good, we like our students to think. And I just felt like I wanted to be at a place where the answer, I would have to think about it first, was a really acceptable answer. He later told me that he asked that question every single applicant that he interviewed. And I was the only one who ever said I would have to think about it. And he said every other student actually tried to answer that question. And this was in the days where there were some trick questions in interviews, like asking you to open the window and it was nailed shut, that kind of stuff. I was tired of interviewing at medical schools that asked me what I was going to do if I got pregnant during medical school. And I finally came up with a great answer to that question. I just looked horrified and I said, but I'm not even married. And I think the interviewer wrote down, too naive to be a medical student. But, it was just a very, as Dr. Schatz had said, it was a very welcoming place. Unlike what Dr. Schatz said, my experience as a medical student at UB was that it was a very small place and that our classes were very small. And I always felt like I had wonderful immediate access. Even the story I shared about meeting with Dean Naughton, I don't even think I had an appointment. I think I just was able to, walk in and give him my proposal, which was scary because he was also a pretty serious guy.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. And so, Richard, as you probably know, across the country, there's still huge popularity with college students wanting to apply to medical school. And again, across the country this past year, kids who are applying, now for the class that would begin in August is higher than it's ever been. And we as deans think in part the pandemic has been in part the cause of that, with people becoming very interested in healthcare. So as you interact with college students, or if you were to interact with them, what would you say is the most important thing students should consider before deciding to go to medical school?
That's a great question. I do want to answer the question that Dr. Moore answered, because my tuition was $500 in 1970. And I had $600 in the bank, and I was able to pay for my tuition and just enough for a little room and board. And then I got a scholarship thereafter. So that was the other good thing about Buffalo. I could afford it. So that's a great question, Dean Cain. Things are changing pretty radically in medicine, and I felt like I was trained very old school. And we had a lot of ex-Hopkins chiefs. We had David Savastin at Duke. We had the great James Weingarten and a host of other luminaries there who were very traditional. And I think for the students who are looking in this direction, I think that they have to really look really hard and deep about why they want to do it. And make sure that what they don't lose, which is one of my big fears, is to lose the touch of humanity that's happening right now in medicine, which I see because I've been in it for so long, and also in teaching programs. I recently gave the graduation commencement speech at a big medical center out here in California last year, and I addressed this topic in great detail. And what I see is a certain detachment, which really, really bothers me. But as you know, in 1973, when I started medical school, they didn't have CT scans, didn't have echoes, didn't have MRIs. We didn't have computers, didn't have phones. All you had was your hands, your ears, and your eyes, and a chest X-ray. And it was really interesting to me to see how much time we spent at the bedside trying to learn as much as you could. Eugene Stead was one of our other great teachers, and he was an absolute marvel at the bedside. I see that's gone now. There's a real pitch, more to let's get more tests, and certainly with the financial issues, you'll see restrictions on how much time you can spend with the patient. Actually caught one of my cardiology fellows examining a patient with the patient fully clothed with a stethoscope, trying to listen through his shirt. And I said, "What are you doing?" I said, take his shirt off. You're the last line of defense here. These patients were sent to you. You have to come up with the answer. And the answer is, well, we can always get an echo and an MRI and all that. I said, you can't think like that. So there's a little detachment that's taking place. And in that commencement speech, I talked a lot about the electronic medical record. And here's where I'm a real Luddite, and I show my age, but I really don't like the medical EPIC or the medical records, not because it's unreliable, but just because it really takes you away from the patient. And very short example of that is I walked into a room and one of my junior staff attendings was talking to the patient, sort of facing the wall because the computer was on the wall, and looking over her shoulder, looking backwards at the patient and typing. And I took her aside. I says, you really shouldn't do that. Just sit in front of the patient, and talk to them. You can write your notes later. And I always make it a point. I always try and teach our fellows, that's the humanity that we have to stay in touch with, or else you're going to lose it. And I myself was a patient. I ended up at UCSD for something, and the fellow came in and did the exact same thing to me. He was typing on the computer and not even looking at me. And I go, oh boy, this is really sad. The attending comes in, who's a little younger than me, and sat right across from me, looked right in my eyes, and we just chatted. He had a little note paper. I said, oh, this is my kind of guy. He writes on paper. So I think that knowing why the students are going into it, the challenges that they're going to be, I don't think anybody goes into medicine now to make money. I think you do it because you have a passion for it and because this is something that's a calling. And if you have all those ingredients and you have the humanity and the human touch, make sure that that's really where your calling is, because I met students along the way who didn't have that human touch, and if you don't have that, then I think you're probably in the wrong business, because there are plenty of smart people out there, but it's that one person who can connect all those dots, from everything from the bench to the clinic and to the human beings that you're actually taking care of.
Next question is for Dr. Moore, and it's ironic because just a friend of mine today was telling me about some misinformation about the coronavirus vaccine that was going around, so it's timely. As more medical advice goes online, including social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok, how can medical professionals strike the balance between effectively using these platforms and helping patients distinguish between reliable and unreliable sources?
The pandemic exposed many weaknesses in our system, including physicians, licensed physicians who spread misinformation, not based on any credible facts or research. Dr. Atlas, it's a travesty. We have elected officials who have medical degrees, who are licensed physicians, who have spread misinformation about vaccines. So we not only have to combat information from uncredible, uncertified, unscreened sources, but we have enemies within our ranks. And so we have to reiterate, even those of us who have our own credibility, what I always recommend to other physicians is you quote the CDC, quote your sources, quote the studies, quote the journals. I often say, it's not just me saying this, it's also because we have to validate. especially in a time in our country when the very essence and definition of what is fact has been challenged. And we can't even agree on the difference between fact and opinion versus fake news and real news. It's a challenge not just within medicine, but surrounding everything that we do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moore. Dr. Schatz, your career has been, been innovation throughout your career. What motivates you to continue to do the work that you do? What inspires you for what's next?
Yeah, great question. I just don't like not knowing something. If I see something, I can't sleep at night until I figure it out. And I've always been like that. I think it comes from my dad. My dad was a brilliant engineer from Georgia Tech. It was in the aviation business, as I was. I was in aviation for a long time myself. Actually applied to be a NASA astronaut in 1979, and they turned me down, but I really wanted to do that. I like challenges, and if I see something that I don't understand, I feel like there's always solutions. And I teach a whole class on innovation, where I teach our young fellows how to think outside the box. Right now, we're working on a hyperbaric oxygen technique for STEMIs, which is really interesting. I heard about this and I couldn't believe it, so I dug into it and I said, "This is really interesting." And I just started working on that with the founders, and we finally got FDA approval. It took 20 years, but we finally got FDA approval. But I like solving problems, and I think it's either in your blood or it isn't, and it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, I'm a master electrician. I can fix toilets. I mean, I run around my house with a utility belt on half the time. I just like solving problems, and medicine is just perfect for that. However, I go back to what I said before, and that is that without the inspiration of the young fellows around, I also live in fear of being embarrassed by the fellows. So they keep you really sharp. And I don't know if Dr. Moore does still teaching with fellows, but some of you probably do. But you live in fear. When my journals show up, I've got 5 or 6 journals that show up every week. I pour through them because I don't want to be embarrassed. I know the fellows, they're on their phones, and I hate my phone. I hate computers. I got to read the paper journal. So I'll pour through those to make sure that they don't one-up me when we have rounds, because these students are so smart nowadays. So there's a little bit of healthy fear in there for just not knowing something.
So for Dr. Moore, in addition to the ethics course that you took at UB, how else did UB prepare you for your medical career and the unique role you've carved out for yourself in healthcare?
Probably in just about every way. So I like what Dr. Schatz said earlier about the role of extracurricular activities at UB, which was very important to me. First of all, I was very privileged to be accepted into a program that UB was experimenting with at the time, which was for inner city students. And it was the summer before first year. And the idea is it was a paid internship program, and you took 2 of your first year classes during the summer. And that allowed you to have a lighter course load freshman year. I think the intention was to make it a diversity recruiting tool, but I was from the worst neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, and I applied and was accepted. And it was a great experience for me to get to know some of my professors, very intimately. I think there were only 8 to 12 of us. I learned where all the bathrooms were, which, in those days was very challenging for women because there weren't that many ladies' rooms. And it's not a coincidence that my podcast is called In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donnica. But it also allowed me to have a much easier course load first and second year, which first of all allowed me to have 2 or 3 jobs, part-time jobs, during both of my preclinical years. And I did make them all sort of medically related. I was a researcher for a medical legal firm and decided then set the stage for my deep-seated dislike for lawyers. I taught a Stanley Kaplan pre-med MCAT course, which paid really well. But I was also a researcher and writing assistant for Dr. Seller in the family medicine department. And I hope everybody knows that UB was a real leader nationally in the movement to create family medicine as a specialty, particularly Dr. Harry Metcalf and Dr. Seller. And I was his research assistant, and he basically let me ghostwrite his textbook, and he let me name it. It was called Differential Diagnosis of Common Clinical Complaints. And it was the first textbook ever to be organized by symptom as opposed to by diagnosis. And his thesis was that patients don't come in and say, you know, I have gout, you know, how do you treat it? They come in and they say, I have pain in my big toe, and, you know, I have the other symptoms. So we did it by symptom. And it was a fabulous, fabulous experience. And I thought about this when I was, you know, 25 years later, writing my own book. And that greatly influenced, you know, how we organized that book. Ironically, I didn't get to pick the title when it was my book. The publisher picked the title, but I picked the title of his book. I also was greatly influenced by the close relationships I had with professors. I had Dr. Paganelli for physiology, who won the teaching award, you know, at least twice while I was there. And Dr. Pepper Davis, who did everything he could to convince me I wanted to go into endocrinology. But years later, I did get to teach neuroendocrine physiology to the first year students at UMDNJ as an adjunct professor. And both of them were tremendous, tremendous role models for me. And then I really, a lot of my experience as a doctor was informed by years and years of experience being a patient. So I was one of those people who was diagnosed with a pretty serious medical problem when I was 11. I had pretty serious scoliosis. And I remember very clearly when the doctor gave us the diagnosis, my first thought at age 11 was, this is going to make me a better doctor. And when I read When Bad Things Happen to Good People, you know, that author talks about if you can figure out the why, even if it doesn't make sense, even if your why is it's God's will or it was meant to be, if you have an answer that meets that why criteria, you can get through just about anything. And Elie Wiesel talks about that with the Holocaust. You know, if you have a belief in the why, you can get through it. So that was my why. And I have been through it. But I also had professors who were then my doctors in medical school. And so seeing them, even Dr. Metcalf was my family physician. And I have a mole on my leg, a very small mole that I remember going to him hysterical about with medical student syndrome at the time. And every time I see that mole on my leg, I think of him. Somebody's got to tell him that. But they were great doctors. And, you know, I do compare my doctors today, or even as the mother of children who've been through the medical system, you know, and this thing about doctors spending more time looking at the computer than looking at you is horrible. And one of my great physicians was Dr. Simmons, who is one of the leading orthopedic spinal surgeons in the world at the time. And he was my professor. I did how many surgery patients get to do a 8-week clinical rotation with their surgeon 2 years before that surgeon operates on them. So that was kind of really dramatic. My extracurricular activities that really influenced me tremendously were first and foremost research. Because I had a lighter academic load first and second year, because I took those courses in the summer and I placed out of statistics because of my college course, I got to do research with some really incredible physicians on some breakthrough, breaking cutting edge topics, particularly in GYN. I participated in the first clinical trial of coronus villus sampling, which was at UB. I participated in a clinical trial when I can't remember the doctor. He was a OBGYN. It begins with L, not Dr. Lippies, the other one. And it was on the use of prophylactic use of nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs to reduce the formation of adhesions in pelvic surgery and abdominal surgery, which was a huge problem. And then I was involved at the Cancer Institute at Roswell Park with a GYN who was doing surgery with a doing research with a breast surgeon on very cutting edge research with mastectomies and lymphedema and the use of pre-op and post-op physical therapy to reduce lymphedema in mastectomy patients. So like just hearing these topics, you could hear how that influenced my whole entire career.
Next question is for Dr. Schatz. And you mentioned before that you decided on medicine pretty early in your career. So how did you come to make that decision so early, and why did you choose cardiology?
My influence came from my family. So my mother was born in Sicily in a very small town outside of Palermo, and very, very, very poor. And she never went to school. She couldn't even go to grade school or even high school. Her mother wouldn't let her because she had to take care of her siblings. And she was always very bitter about that because she was very bright and she wanted to learn. So she taught herself how to read, and then eventually got tired of where she was living because there was no future for her. And the winds of war were coming in the 1930s. And so she jumped on a boat when she was 17 and came to America and landed in Brooklyn. And that's where she grew up, couldn't speak English, but she knew the value of education. And she said, even in her poor hometown, the doctors always did very well. The doctor always had food on his table. And that's a story I heard from when I was a very, very young kid. And so she was very, very big on education because she had been spared that herself. So, I don't remember. I remember going to the doctor a few times. I was kind of fascinated with all the toys and all the tools that the doctor had back then. Then my dad was an engineer. After World War II, he came back, and although they were both, believe it, they started their careers as dancers in New York City. And my mother wouldn't marry him unless he went to college. So he actually got into West Point, but was rejected because of his physical thing. And then he ended up in Georgia Tech. So he had a real science background, which is instrumental for me because he was able to teach me a lot of things along the way, math and science. So between that background and my mother's influence on education, and then I really felt like I had an aptitude for math and science. It actually came easy to me. Everything else was hard. The humanities were very difficult. I had trouble reading a pleasure book, but I could read a science book from cover to cover. And so that was my real inspiration. And then when I got to UB, I decided I was going to just try that and then go into the pre-med track because I looked at all the curriculum and I said, oh my gosh, I've already had all these courses in high school. I had a very enriched high school experience also. I had we call it AP now, but there it was called something else. But I had already done a lot of chemistry and a lot of advanced math. And so I felt like I was prepared. And then also the inspiration of all my colleagues. Everybody on my floor over in Tower Hall, they were all pre-med, and it just felt like the right thing to do. And then I had a couple surgeries myself. I think, I don't know if I was at the downtown, it was downtown Buffalo there, kind of semi-emergent surgeries. And I got to know the doctors pretty well. And I liked what I saw. But what I didn't know was if I really had an aptitude for it. And I didn't know if I had that human touch or the caring. Rather than just being a bookworm my whole life, I wasn't sure. But I think once I got to Duke, I realized that I really, really, really liked that humanity part and the human touch part. And also, it was an unusual program back then because you did first year book, second year was clinical, third year was a whole year off for research. So just like Dr. Moore said, I went over to the cardiology guys because I always found them really, really interesting. And then I decided to do a whole year of cardiac research. And there I met a whole bunch of people. I started my career in ultrasound, actually. We had the only two-dimensional echo machine in the world because it was built there at Duke. And every time we come in the morning, we'd see some pathology, we'd write a paper on it. So even in medical school, I was writing papers. I worked with Joe Kislow there. Then I spent some time in Rotterdam with some of the great mavens in the early days of ultrasound. So that, but again, the combination of science I got at Buffalo translated very nicely to what was going on at Duke because of the basic science things that I was doing there. And the quest for research really got my attention, and always that inquisitiveness. So that's how it all started. I think, I don't know, left on my own, if my mother wasn't such a powerful influence on me, I'm not sure what I would do. I actually wanted to be an athlete. I wanted I thought I was going to be some NFL quarterback. I actually, before I actually got to Buffalo, I had a scholarship to play in Dartmouth, and a partial scholarship, but it wasn't enough because tuition was like $1,200, and the tuition wouldn't cover it. So I realized that I wouldn't have enough money to go there, and even the scholarship wouldn't do. So, yeah, that's kind of a funny story. I don't know what I would have done if it weren't for that influence, but that's our sliding door for everybody. Everybody's got a story like that.
So I want to thank you, Dr. Moore and Dr. Schatz. With that question, we will now conclude what has been a wonderful discussion with our SUNY honorary degree recipients. I've learned a lot, and I've learned a lot about both of you, which is really great. Dr. Moore and Dr. Schatz, thank you for joining us today and for all you do in service of UB's mission of excellence.